Tilde, misinformation, misrepresentation, and outright lies fucking everywhere. It can only be MTV. Again. Now, before we go any further with this, I'd like to point out something rather interesting about this video. Throughout, you will notice that the initial premise about this piece that we're about to look at is, what would the world be like if there was no Black History Month? As in, if the celebration and acknowledgement of black people's accomplishments didn't exist. However, the actual point that they address in this video, the actual implication, as well as the title, is A World Without Black History, full stop. As in, a world where black people simply did not exist. It's almost like they're strawmanning their own content. So with that cleared up, I'm going to be addressing what they're actually saying in this video, which is the if black people didn't exist, the world would be like this, as opposed to the actual premise, which is what happens if we simply didn't celebrate the achievements of these people. The disconnect is real. Let's go.
Ugh, I hate having a birthday during Black History Month. Why do I only get a day when they get an entire month?
You're so smart, babe.
Not really a serious point here, but I just find this sort of level of thinking a little bit retarded. It's like, why do I only have one birthday when there's an entire month set aside to celebrate an entire cultural group or an entire load of inventors? It's just really fucking dumb. I mean, I get that they're trying to portray this guy as a bit of an idiot, but seriously, that's just off-the-chart stupidity.
You know what we really need? We need a White History Month.
Did someone say that there should be a White History Month?
Yeah, how'd you know?
Let me guess, you're not racist or anything, but you just think it'd be better if we didn't have a Black History Month in America at all.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, again, not really a serious point here. I'm just putting this in until we get to the actual meat of the bullshit that they start spouting. But someone stating that they just think that one thing should exist over here doesn't necessarily mean that they're stating that something else shouldn't. To give an example, this is like someone saying, I'd like to have a cup of tea, and someone then responding, why do you think no one should drink coffee? Sure, this guy then switches position as soon as she says that, so this is again kind of a not major point, but it's just something that I noticed that kind of annoyed me a little bit.
Ugh, let's get this over with.
And then Chadwick wins cribbage.
It's Mandy and I. Why are we dressed so lame? And what are those stupid ass shoes? Why is everything so different?
Okay, so this is where you can see that they are setting up this premise of basically a world without black people as opposed to simply a world without Black History Month as a celebration. And in doing so, they've obviously tried to portray a world how they think it would be without black people. However, they have of course fallen at the first hurdle. So let's start with the clothing change that they've instituted. The most obvious example here is, of course, this guy's puffer jacket that he's wearing. The implication being that in a world without black people, the puffer jacket would not exist. Unfortunately for MTV, the puffer jacket was invented by a gentleman by the name of Eddie Bauer in the 1930s. Bauer was a very active outdoor sportsman and quite enjoyed angling and hiking. In the 1930s, he was caught outside on a particularly cold winter's day and noticed that he was suffering from the early signs of hypothermia. Fortunately, he was able to recover from these symptoms. This near-death experience was the impetus that actually made him begin to look at creating a new form of ultra-insulated, lightweight jacket that would be able to stay dry while maintaining its insulating properties, unlike other existing jackets at the time, which tend to be made out of wool, and as such could just absorb moisture and become absolutely saturated, very heavy, and of course freeze when you're wearing them. The Russian military at the time had experimented with filling waterproof jackets with duck down, but found that the feathers would often pool down around the bottom of the jacket and in the bottom of the sleeves. In order to combat this problem, Bauer decided to keep the downing in place by quilting the jacket and creating small diamond patterns that would evenly distribute the insulation throughout the entire jacket, and sealing it off with various ribbed cuffs and collars that help to trap the heat and block out wind. In 1936, Bauer began selling his new invention under the name the Skyliner. The Skyliner jacket was massively successful, and in 1939 Eddie Bauer patented the design. Such was the success of the Skyliner jacket that in 1942 the United States Army Air Corps commissioned Eddie Bauer to develop the B-9 Flight Parka, another down-filled parka designed to keep pilots warm at high altitudes, and is a jacket that is so efficient you can still purchase variations of them to this day. So as we can see, without Black history, this guy could still have his puffer jacket. As for the shoes issue, I'm not entirely sure how I want to play this one. It's really rather interesting that they portray white people's shoes as being the Crocs sandals, which is especially unusual given the fact that Crocs was founded in 2002, and most of the patents for their designs of shoes, sandal, and clog seem to sit around the 2006-2007 mark, and I'm pretty sure white people have been wearing shoes since long before that time. Just for funsies, let's go as absolutely far back in history as we can, to the world's oldest shoe, which resembles more of a sandal than a shoe, but has been dated somewhere around 8,000 to 7,000 BC, and was excavated at Fort Rock Cave, half a mile west of the Fort Rock volcanic crater in central Oregon, USA. So these may not be the very first shoes ever made, because all footwear from this era is obviously made out of highly perishable material, so there may be older pairs from other areas of the world that simply don't exist yet. However, because of their geographical location in the United States, we can quite safely say that the current world's oldest shoe was not made by black people. Let's get a little bit more modern and look at the first leather shoe that we have on record, which is from about 3500 BC and was discovered in Armenia. And Armenians aren't black. Even just a cursory glance over the evolution of footwear in, say, the United Kingdom, you will see that there is a perpetual evolution of footwear as time goes on, and I can guarantee you that because of its geographical location, every single one of those iterations would have been invented by someone who was white European. This notion that if black people didn't exist, the only shoes white people had would be Crocs is laughable. InB4 people shout, "Straw man, they didn't say they'd only have Crocs." Yes, that's fucking obvious. It's just really weird that that is the example that they would pick, considering they are basically considered to be one of the most embarrassing kinds of footwear to have, when they could have picked from hundreds, nay, thousands of other alternatives, invented by someone who was white. Anyway, we're going to continue on with the video, and up next they are going to throw a gish gallop of accusation and points, so I'm going to allow that to play out in its entirety, and then I'm going to break it down point by point. Off we go.
Well, you see, Chad, without black inventors, our world would have missed out on huge advancements in cell phone technology, gaming consoles, and personal computers. Not to mention important shoemaking techniques, light bulbs that last more than a few days, and delicious, delicious potato chips.
So the first thing you'll probably notice here is they have not actually given any specific examples whatsoever. It's just a kind of blanket throwaway statement. Important advancements in cell phone technology. Like what in particular? Fortunately, for I believe the first time ever, MTV have actually given a list of citations in their description box, so we're going to look at these one at a time. First up.
Without black inventors, our world would have missed out on huge advancements in cell phone technology.
Okay, Wikipedia it is then. So, James West, the inventor of the foil electric microphone, or more correctly should I say co-inventor of the foil electric microphone, As you can see, he worked alongside Gerhard Sessler, who is a white German, so giving full credit of this invention to black people is a little bit misleading as a result. So I could leave this there, but I want to make another point on top of this. And yes, I acknowledge that the original point was only advancements in cell phone technology. Which is good, because if you want to look at the history of cell phone technology, you will actually realize that the first cellular phone device was invented by a white person. Now, while there were radios invented before the first cellular phone, the first cell phone as we would know it was invented by someone called Martin Cooper, and his creation was the Motorola Dynatac. And the reason that this mobile phone is so important is because it was the first portable mobile phone. It was the first mobile phone that didn't have to have a large battery pack housed in a briefcase or something like that alongside it. Hence, it's basically the first mobile telephone as we know it today. Back on topic of James West and his co-invention of the foil electric microphone. The foil electric microphone is basically an incremental improvement of the already existing condenser microphone, which appears to have its origin at some time in the early 1900s. Developed by E.C. Wendt, who is, you guessed it, white. Now, I don't make these points to belittle the work of James West. Undoubtedly, his work has had a massive impact on modern society. But the overall tone of this video, when taken in context with everything else that they say, they really do seem to be pushing it as though these technologies and these things that they're listing would not exist without black people, when quite clearly the technology was already established. These are merely iterations upon inventions, which is absolutely fine and is certainly something worth celebrating. But in the grand scheme of things, even if James West didn't ever exist, we would still have cell phones. Next.
Gaming consoles.
Okay, your source is AtlantaBlackstar.com. That doesn't sound like a slightly biased website at all. And Atlanta Blackstar simply states Gerald A. Lawson, what he invented, the modern home video gaming console. Why it's important. Anyone who owns a PlayStation, Wii, or Xbox should know Lawson's name. He created the first home video game system that used interchangeable cartridges, offering gamers a chance to play a variety of games and giving video game makers a way to earn profits by selling individual games, a business model that exists today. So I did a little bit of digging about Jerry Lawson, and he helped to create the video gaming system known as the Fairchild Channel F, which was the first home video gaming system that made use of interchangeable ROM cartridges. This console was marketed back in 1976. Seems pretty cut and dry, right? Well, not entirely. To get the full picture of the story, we need to go back a couple of years earlier to 1974, and two men by the name of Lawrence Haskell and Wallace Kitchener. I've only been able to confirm that Lawrence Haskell is white. Wallace Kitchener I'm not sure about, although given the fact that his name is German, it's more than likely. Lawrence Haskell and Wallace Kitchener are basically the granddaddies of the video game cartridge. With the introduction of Intel's 8008 microprocessor in 1974, Kitchener realized the new technology was capable of revolutionizing the emerging video game market with games that could go beyond bouncing a white dot back and forth. The timing was perfect as Kitchener's company Alpex was slowly being pushed out of the cash register business by IBM. While Kitchener worked on the hardware, the company brought on Haskell, a gamer himself, to design the games for the remote access video entertainment console, codenamed Raven. One of the key ideas that Kitchener strived towards was the idea that the consumer should be able to replace the ROM chips at will, enabling them to pick the software being loaded whenever they wanted to. We went to Radio Shack and bought these little plastic boxes, he recalls, and we were able to plug the little box into the console with a connector we had put on it. So you can see here that the groundwork for the console is already in place. They have a box, they have the cartridges, they have the means by which to do this, but currently what they are lacking is the funding to do so, because their company, Alpex, is basically going down the drain because IBM is putting them out of business. With the basic designs down, Alpex decided they need a partner to take their idea all the way, so they teamed up with the Fairchild Semiconductor, whose team of engineers helped them refine the Raven, which at the time was nothing more than a 16 by 16 by 5 inch metal box filled with circuit boards, a handful of bulbous game modules, and an overly complex keyboard for input. Between 1975 and 1976, the Raven was sized down, its keyboard replaced by a joystick, and its cartridges made to match standard 8-track tapes. Unrecognizable from its original design, the console was renamed the Channel F for fun. So joining the dots together, you can see that this is where Jerry Lawson enters. He was part of the team that helped to refine the already existing Raven console with its interchangeable cartridges, invented by Lawrence Haskell and Wallace Kirshner, and rebrand it and sell it via his company as the Fairchild F. So again, I don't want to downplay Jerry Lawson's contribution to this. I have no doubt that his work in refining the Raven into the very successful Fairchild Channel F console was invaluable. But ultimately, he was more of a middleman whose company was providing the funding to refine a product and push it to market by acquiring the actual concept off of another company, and off of these two white guys. And all of this information has been rather meticulously gathered by someone by the name of Benj Edwards, who interviewed all of the parties involved. So, sorry MTV, but this is really not a very good example, because the actual technological advancement was created by two white guys. Next.
And personal computers.
Teacher.scholastic.com it is then. Wow, this is it, is it? Okay, I guess we're gonna work with this then. Mark Dean co-invented the personal computer, dramatically changing the way people work. This first sentence will immediately be reneged upon when it actually talks about his invention. Dean worked for IBM as a computer scientist. He was one of the original inventors of the IBM personal computer and the color PC monitor. He is also responsible for creating the technology that allows devices such as keyboards, mice, and printers to be plugged in a computer and communicate with each other. Dean also managed the team that created the 1 GHz processor chip. Dean continued to further his own education, pursuing a master's degree and eventually a doctorate from Stanford University. Seems pretty cut and dry once again, doesn't it? But I want to get a second opinion on this because I like to review things from multiple sources. So the main contribution that this seems to be talking about here is the work that Mark Dean did on the industry standard architecture system, which is, as the previous source mentioned, the means by which your computer basically contacts all of its various peripheral devices. However, I couldn't help but notice something a little bit different here. This source mentions someone called Dennis Moyler working on this project as well, something which the Black History in America slide somehow managed to neglect. I wonder why that is, because if we go and look at Mark Dean's profile on the inductees page of the National Inventors Hall of Fame, we will once again see this name Dennis Moyler mentioned as his partner for all of this stuff that he did. Now, if we search that name, now I see why it wasn't mentioned on the Black History in America page. The thing about this point is that this was actually a fairly legitimate point. Mark Dean certainly does have a very impressive list of achievements in regards to computing technological development. I can only assume that MTV, in talking about this, they are talking about the industry standard architecture that he co-invented. But why, oh why, would they pick a source that intentionally leaves out the fact that it was co-invented with a white guy as well? It seems to me almost like they are intentionally picking sources that, rather amusingly, attempt to whitewash white people out of these inventions and attribute them entirely to the black person who was involved. But maybe that is just me being cynical. Next.
Not to mention important shoemaking techniques.
Teacher.scholastic.com. Again, Jan Ernst Matzeliger. He said, absolutely butchering the name. In 1883, Jan successfully invented what many people before him had attempted, an automated shoemaking machine that quickly attached the top of the shoe to the sole. This process is called lasting. Jan's machine could produce more than 10 times what human hands could create in a day. This invention revolutionized the shoemaking industry and made shoes affordable to the average person. So I've done a lot of research around this, and this point is actually totally legit, apart from two very minor nitpicks that I have. The technique of shoe lasting was an already established technique. So Jan didn't invent anything around the technique, he didn't alter their technique, he mechanized it. But that's a really minor semantic quibble more than anything else. And why was this important? Well, when a customer went into a shoe shop to get a pair of shoes made, they would have their feet measured and recreated out of blocks of wood that would then be used to cut the leather for the shoe. And the cutting and stitching of the leather could actually be automated up until this point. The problem came when they wanted to fold the excess leather underneath the shoe and then be able to attach the sole onto the underneath. This is the lasting process, and this was something which used to have to be done by hand. Jan's machine was able to take the shoe into it, fold the excess leather over, and apply all of the necessary nails around the edge so that the shoe could then be soled. And this was massively more efficient than doing them by hand, and totally eliminated the bottleneck at the end of the creation process, which was part of what made shoemaking such a lengthy process and kept the prices reasonably high. Jan's machine, as a result, drove the cost of shoes down and was of massive benefit to everyone. So this is a totally legitimate point that they have raised. Well done, MTV, but I do have one other very small, minor nitpick. And this really depends on how technical you want to be. Jan Ernst Matzeliger is actually of mixed descent. His father was a Dutch engineer of German descent, and his mother was a black Surinese slave of African descent. But again, this is a relatively minor quibble in an otherwise actually legitimate point. Next.
Light bulbs that last more than a few days.
Now, this one gets very interesting and perhaps a little bit controversial. The source being cited here is science.howstuffworks.com, and it talks about the carbon-filament light bulb. Thomas Edison often gets the credit for inventing the light bulb, but in reality, dozens of inventors were working to perfect commercial lighting. One of those inventors was Lewis Latimer. Latimer was hired at a law firm that specialized in patents in 1868. While there, he taught himself mechanical drawing and was promoted from office boy to draftsman. In his time at the firm, he worked with Alexander Graham Bell on the plans for the telephone. Latimer then began his foray into the world of light. Edison was working on a light bulb model with a paper filament. The filament is the thin fiber that the electric current heats to produce light. In Edison's experiments, the paper would burn down in 15 minutes or so, rendering the bulb unrealistic for practical use. Now, this doesn't actually tell us very much about this particular patent that Mr. Latimer holds. Now, get ready for a little bit of light drama. Enter a gentleman by the name of Hiram Maxim, an American-born British inventor who was living in the United States. Described as a prolific inventor, he invented and patented the Maxim gun, the first portable fully automatic machine gun, and held patents on other mechanical devices such as a mousetrap, hair curling irons, and steam pumps. And rather interestingly, Hiram Maxim also claims to be the inventor of the light bulb. And this is where things get very interesting, a little controversial, and I believe we might be looking at a little bit of historical drama. Hiram Maxim patented the apparatus for the manufacture of filaments for incandescent lamps on February 21st, 1881. His applicant of the patent reads, "To all whom it may concern, be it known that I, Hiram S. Maxim, of the city of Brooklyn, in the county of Kings and state of New York, have invented a new and useful apparatus for the preparation of carbons for electric lamps, of which the following is a specification. This invention relates to the mode of preparing carbons for incandescent electric lamps by condensing and building them up by the action of electricity upon a hydrocarbon vapor or other carbonaceous gases that deposit their carbon at high temperatures, as described by me in other applications for letters patent heretofore filed by me in the United States Patent Office, and the object of the present invention is to provide an efficient apparatus for the rapid, economical, and accurate accomplishment of this work." So this is a patent for a device that will manufacture carbon filaments for light bulbs. Now, what makes this particularly interesting? Well, in 1879, Latimer was working as a draftsman at the US Electric Lighting Company owned by Maxim. Now, 2 days before Maxim's patent for the apparatus for the manufacture of filaments for incandescent lamps, Latimer filed a patent of his own for the process of manufacturing carbons. His submission with the patent makes clear that this particular patent is only for the process of carbonizing the conductors for incandescent lamps. It is merely a patent for the process of creating them, not for a device to do so. So Latimer gets in and patents the process of creating a filament, and then 2 days later Maxim comes in and patents a machine that is actually able to manufacture these filaments. The first is simply, hey, look at this process that I've worked out how to do, it belongs to me. The second is, here is the device that will enable you to mass produce these things. And this is where the water gets a little bit muddy. And I blame this on the part of the MTV video. The description box quite clearly states Lewis Latimer developed long-lasting carbon filaments for light bulbs, and that is true. However, the statement in the video was light bulbs that last more than a few days. Neither of these patents relates to an actual light bulb. One is the basic process of creating the filament, the basic chemical reaction, if you will. The second is a device to produce them en masse. Shall we then add a little bit more drama and realize that on April 18th, 1881, the same year, 2 months later, Latimer teams up with another person by the name of Nichols, who was white, to actually patent a light bulb that makes use of the filaments conceptualized by Latimer, but being manufactured by Maxim. So who, first of all, really gets the credit here for which claim? Because I find myself in a curious position where the citation box beneath the video appears to be making a different claim to the video itself. The single sentence beneath the video is technically correct. Latimer did come up with the process by which to create the carbons necessary for the filament in light bulbs. However, Maxim is the person who created the device that was actually capable of taking that process and using it to make filaments for lamps. But then the video talks about light bulbs, not filaments, which was a co-creation between Latimer and Nichols. So a white guy and a black guy. This is getting ridiculously convoluted because MTV doesn't seem to have a consistent message here. I'm gonna give you guys a D+ for this point. It could have been accurate, but you seem to have intentionally fucked it up in order to push a bit of a narrative and make it seem like a black person did more than they actually did in your video. Next.
And delicious, delicious potato chips. A world without black history is completely different.
And your source for this is science.howstuffworks.com. Again. No chef likes to hear that his or her work has been rejected, but George Crumb was able to make magic out of some man's disconnect. In 1853, Crumb was working as a chef at a resort in Saratoga Springs. A customer sent his dish of French fries back to the kitchen, claiming they were too thick, too mushy, and not salty enough. Crumb, in an irritated fit, cut the potatoes as thinly as possible, fried them until they were burnt crisps, and threw a generous handful of salt on top. He sent the plate out to the customer, hoping to teach the patron a thing or two about complaining. However, the customer loved the crisp chips, and soon the dish was one of the most popular things on the menu. In 1860, when Crumb opened up his own restaurant, every table received a bowl of chips. Crumb never patented his invention, nor was he the one who bagged them and began selling them in grocery stores, but junk food lovers the world over still have him to thank for this crunchy treat. Unfortunately for you, your claim and source are both wrong. First of all, and completely irrelevantly to my point, George Crumb wasn't actually black, he was mixed-race African Native American. So some people may be willing to disregard your "if black people didn't exist you wouldn't have potato chips" based on that alone. I, however, have a different reason, and that is that George Crumb did not invent the potato chip, or the crisp, as we call it in Britain. The earliest mention of the potato chip comes from a book written by William Kitchener, entitled The Cook's Oracle, which was written in 1822. 30-something years before George Crumb's supposed invention, and it describes them as such: potatoes fried in slices or shavings. Peel large potatoes, slice them about 1/4 of an inch thick, or cut them in shavings round and round as you would peel a lemon. Dry them well in a clean cloth and fry them in lard or dripping. Take care that your fat and frying pan are quite clean. Put it on a quick fire. Watch it, and as soon as the lard boils and is stiff, put in the slices of potato and keep moving them till they are crisp. Take them up and lay them to drain on a sieve. Send them up with a very little salt sprinkled over them. Now, some people might look at that description and say, well, they're clearly describing something more like French fries, with the 1/4 of an inch thick. However, it is the peel a lemon part that we are interested in, because a peeled lemon looks kind of like this, or like these. Either very thin spirals or exceptionally thin, long fingers. This is the first documented account of potato chips or crisps being cooked. So, sorry MTV, you got white people to thank for those delicious, delicious potato chips. And you know what makes this even more embarrassing for you? You've used Wikipedia as some of your sources for other things, and even George Crumb's Wikipedia page, which I assume you must have checked, tells you that the potato chip story about him is a legend. Next.
Yeah, but all that stuff would have gotten invented anyway.
If all inventions are inevitable, then why celebrate any inventors, Chad?
Well, this actually raises a very interesting question. Why do we celebrate things that get invented? Or, more correctly, why do we celebrate some things, but most achievements actually go completely unacknowledged? In mainstream society, anyway. People tend to celebrate things for their merit. But in this particular instance, you seem to want to celebrate things because of the colour of the people who made them. thus kind of removing the merit element. And as we've seen from some of the examples, you're celebrating people inventing things that they either didn't invent or that they were merely a part of a group who invented them. You are so desperate to push identity politics to the forefront of the celebration that you are actively removing other people from history by only acknowledging one inventor of something because of the color of their skin, as opposed to 2, 3, 4, 5, however many other people who contributed just as much. But that's equality, right?
Wait, where's Grandpa? Grandpa's dead?
Yes. Not only did a black engineer help invent the pacemaker, but the first successful open-heart surgery was done by a black surgeon, so...
Okay, this is clearly a two-parter, so let's address them one at a time.
Not only did a black engineer help invent the pacemaker...
No. The very first pacemaker, if you want to call it that, was actually invented by John A. McWilliam, a white guy in Britain in 1889. Now, in this particular example, we're using the term pacemaker very loosely. Basically, he had a couple of really big batteries, a couple of electrodes, and a heart. And he worked out that you were able to stimulate the heart of animals and humans by applying electrical pulses to the heart. This was reported on in great length in the British Medical Journal in 1889. I will leave a link to the original article in the box below. Feel free to go and read it. It's a good couple of pages long, but very interesting. The first actual instance of a pacemaker, and again I'm using the term loosely, being used to actually keep someone alive, was an instance in Australia by Dr. Mark C. Lidwell, who is also white, who again used a needle inserted into a person to apply an electrical charge directly to the heart, and he used this technique in Sydney Hospital to revive a stillborn infant whose heart then continued to beat of its own accord at the end of 10 minutes of direct electrical stimulation. And this would appear to be the first actual example of a true pacemaker after a fashion. Now, don't worry, I am going to get around to looking at your source. I just wanted to get this out of the way because these are actually the first pacemakers. Because once again, we've got a bit of a disconnect between your citation and what you're actually saying. You say, the first pacemaker. In reality, your source, which is once again that god-awful teacher.scholastics.com page, which talks about Otis Boykin, who improved the pacemaker. More correctly, he improved the internal pacemaker. The internal pacemaker is nowhere near the first pacemaker. The internal pacemaker, as we'll go on to see, actually comes nearly half a century after the first actual pacemakers. And the internal pacemaker was actually invented by a Swedishman, Dr. Rune Elmqvist, in 1958. And Otis Boykin had absolutely nothing to do with it whatsoever. So you're basically completely wrong on this point. Next.
But the first successful open-heart surgery was done by a black surgeon, so...
The short answer here is no, but I'm going to explain why. Let's look at your source, shall we? The African American Registry, another totally unbiased website. On this date, in 1893, the first successful American open-heart surgery was performed by a black surgeon, Dr. Daniel Hale Williams. Dr. Daniel Williams completed the operation on a young man named James Cornish. He had been rushed to Provident Hospital in Chicago, a hospital which Dr. Williams had founded and was one of the few hospitals that welcomed African Americans with a stab wound. Williams repaired the wound with the use of sutures. Now that sounds very impressive, a stab to the heart and he repaired it with sutures. Unfortunately, that's not actually the case. If you read the actual notes from the surgery, or even just the abstract of the notes from the surgery, you will find that Dr. Daniel Hale Williams was the first black physician to be a character member and a fellow of the American College of Surgeons. In 1893, he successfully sutured a pericardial laceration resulting from a stab wound to the heart. The patient recovered completely. Now it's time for a little bit of Biology 101. The pericardium is not the heart. The pericardium is a fluid-filled sac around the heart, and the fluid around it basically serves as a lubricant for the moving surface of the heart, so that it basically doesn't rub against anything else around it. So Dr. Daniel Williams did not actually operate upon the heart, he operated upon the pericardium. However, if we want to count operations upon the pericardium as an operation upon the heart, for some reason, then Dr. Daniel Williams was beaten to it by Dr. Henry Dalton, who 2 years previously performed the first suturing of the pericardium, making it the true first suturing of the pericardium on record. As for the first surgery performed on the heart proper, well, that honor goes to Dr. Luther Leonidas Hill Jr. In the early morning hours of September 15th, 1902, Hill was summoned by 2 local Montgomery physicians who were attempting to treat Henry Myrick, a 13-year-old African-American youth who had been the victim of a stab wound to the heart the previous afternoon. 6 hours passed before the first physicians had been called, and another 2 hours before Hill arrived at the boy's home. Myrick's wound had been bleeding continuously, and although he was still conscious, his pulse was fading. Hill convinced the family to let him operate on the wound. Although he was widely regarded as an authority on heart wounds, Hill had not actually operated on a living heart. Hill moved Myrick to a table and by lantern light began the procedure, assisted by his brother and a 4th physician who had arrived to administer chloroform to the patient. Hill opened the youth's chest and discovered a great deal of internal bleeding within the pericardium, the protective tissue surrounding the heart. To relieve pressure on the injured organ, Hill opened the pericardial sac to drain the blood. He then stitched the stab wound, which was in the left ventricle of Myrick's heart, with catgut thread. The entire procedure lasted 45 minutes. Myrick survived and within a few weeks had recovered from his injuries. With this procedure, Hill became the first American physician to successfully repair a wounded heart in a surgery that the patient survived. And that is the first case of someone actually operating on the heart, not on the pericardium. In short, the story that a black guy was the first person to perform open heart surgery on someone is a fabrication. He performed an operation on the pericardium, something which had been done before by a white person, and the actual first surgery performed on a heart was done by a white person. But hey, MTV, if you've learned anything from this saga, it's that the first person to receive an operation to the heart was indeed a black person. So there you go. That is an actual legitimate thing that you can add to your list. You're welcome.
But Black history is not just about technology. So, what do you feel like listening to? Classical, Irish step dancing, polka music, an entire crooner station, more classical.
Banana. Because copyright flagging if you play too much at once.
Okay, I see what you're doing here. Just put on Elvis and I'll be good.
Elvis who?
Fine, I walked right into that. Kenny Chesney or something.
Ooh, sorry, dude. Country music has its roots in Black R&B, which means a world without Black history is a world without country music.
No!
Okay, I really don't give that much of a fuck about this point because musical elitists will create different genres almost at will to excuse anything and put bands that they like in certain boxes and bands they don't like in other boxes and all sorts of nonsense like that. But the gist of it is, a world without black people would still have country music. The reason being is that country music is a genre of music that had its roots in American folk music and Western music. American folk music was an encompassing all-term for a mixture of all of the different kinds of folk music that came from Europe, and all of the people who emigrated from there to America, so it took a large amount of influence from Irish folk music, English folk music, and other European countries. Now, as country music evolved, obviously, yes, it did incorporate rhythm and blues elements which were more prominent in the African-American population at the time, but the notion that it wouldn't exist without black people is ridiculous. It would just exist in a different state.
This place is lame. Where are we?
Times Square, Midtown Manhattan. Ever heard of it?
Yeah, right. There's more like some boring-ass town and some shitty little country or some shit.
Given how much snow there is around there, I bet you're both happy that you're wearing those puffer jackets that were invented by a white person. Teehee.
Pretty much. Not only was most of early New York City built by African slaves, but without black slaves, the South never developed its labor-intensive cotton and tobacco plantations.
What?
Ooh, we're playing the hypothetical alt history game. I love this one.
Which means that the North never developed its financial sector or heavy industries meant to support that very same lucrative cotton industry.
What?
What? Oh, wait, hang on. I've got a really good idea. You guys keep going. I'll be right back.
It's entirely possible that without the contributions of black Americans, we wouldn't have the money to have made the Louisiana Purchase from France.
What?
Alright, I'm ready. Let's do this. We're gonna have some African-American fun, because it's relevant.
I said what in the butt. I said what in the butt. I said
What?
in the butt. I said
What?
in the butt. You wanna do it in my butt? In my butt. You wanna do it in my butt? In my butt. You wanna do it in my butt? In my butt. Let's do it in the butt. Okay.
Okay, I'm done. Let's get on with this.
The land deal that expanded America's borders and catapulted it into being one of the world's leading food producers, as well as a global leader.
Wait, so you're saying that without black people, most of this country is owned by France?
It's entirely possible.
Well, seeing as we're doing some ridiculous alt-history theory crafting where any story is just as valid as any other, considering the fact that America was making use of Irish slaves and Oriental slaves, as well as black slaves, I posit to you that if black people didn't exist, America would simply have expanded its operation of enslaving people from Ireland and from the East Asian countries, and would probably have achieved the same result anyway. Theory crafting is fun, but it proves nothing.
No! No! Take me back! I want to go back! I want to go back! What month is it?
February.
Specifically!
Black History Month?
Oh, thank God.
Hallelujah, blatant lies and misinformation have made the white devil repent.
Happy Black History Month, Grandpa. Happy Black History Month, Potato Chip. Happy Black History Month, Cell Phone. Happy Black History Month, Hip Hop and Streetwear Apparel. God bless Black History Month.
Black History Month? You just said there should be a white history rule. Okay.
I'm woke now.
Seriously, MTV, fuck you, fuck your racist propaganda, and fuck your revisionist view of history. I'm fucking done.